Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Okay, so we've talked about this a lot, but I wanted to preface this. Max Verstappen is having one of the most incredible seasons we've ever seen in the history of Formula One. Now, granted, it gets a little dicey when you start looking back in the 50s and 60s, but it's kind of hard to tell because they only had 10 races at one point and 8 races at one point. You can't really make a comparison to 23 races.
No, it's like when you look at, any other sport really, there's like a modern era, and then there was when the game started, right? Baseball, football, soccer, or football for our European friends. The games have changed and evolved so much that the records don't always line up. In Formula One, the sport has relatively, remained the same, but the length of the season, the number of wins, the rules, the margins of victory has grown as the sport grew. Because when they first started Formula One, they were running like 5, 6, 7, 10 races a year. Right. And now we're talking about a season where 24 races were planned
for next season.
And we're gonna end up running 22 or 23 of them.
Guys, this is Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. We're your hosts, Jeremiah
and Thomas.
And today, we're going to take a look at some of the most dominant seasons in Formula One history, both driver and constructor, just to kind of get an overview of how dominant this season by Red Bull and Max Verstappen really is.
If you take a look at articles that are being published about this season, you'll find that Max Verstappen is currently on pace to have the most dominant season of any Formula One driver. And I want to clarify a few things when we refer to dominance or wins or percentages. It's kind of opinionated, right? Because we talked about how every season has a different number of races. So You can't look back at the 70 years of Formula One and say, oh, Max has 17 wins. He's the best driver of all time. It doesn't work that way, because what if there was a season where there was 9 races and a guy won 9 races? That's the best you can do. So a lot of this comes down to percentage of wins per year. That's the best metric for tracking how dominant a driver was in their era. If you look at 2023... Okay. Max has won 77.78% of the races available. He has won 7 out of 9. That puts him in first place.
Now, granted, we're not even halfway through this season as the time of the recording of this episode. So that's subject to change,
sure,
possibly. Or we see him clean house for the rest of this season and he takes the throne as the most successful season in F1 history.
Right. He won't have 100%, but 77.78, 80%, it's still great, and it's still way enough for first place. Right now, the second place finisher is 75%, which is Alberto Ascari, who in 1952 won 6 out of 8.
Here again, 6 out of 8, not 24.
Right, but if you elaborate out that 8 races to a 24 race season, it's still 75%.
Yeah, I understand. It would be cool to see if somebody like back in the day, if they did run that many races, just so that we could kind of see the differences. Now, the sport has changed, like we said, on multiple levels to where cars can now follow each other better. They're closer in pace, because back then I think we looked up what the longest gap in F1 history, but like a longest winning margin from first to second in an F1 race. And it was like 4 minutes, almost 5 minutes.
It was 4 minutes and 50 something seconds.
Yeah, that's not going to happen nowadays. You could take the shortest track in F1. Heck, even the longest track, that's still lapping the guy in second at least twice. That's unreal.
It was 4 minutes and 54 seconds.
Gosh. Just imagine you're the guy in second and the guy in first is right on your tail. Well, hang on a second.
Yeah, and so you look at modern F1 when you have, was it Lewis Hamilton in 2008? He wins by 1 minute and 8 seconds.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Which is basically as he's coming around to the start-finish line, he sees second place at the first turn of the race.
Gosh, that is ridiculous. Yeah, 2008, he won by 1 minute, 8 seconds. That's an unheard of time.
And
I mean, it's not unheard of because obviously the record's 4 minutes. But if you were to compare that to Max Verstappen today, winning by anything over a minute is just unreal.
And still setting the stage here for dominance. Jeremiah mentioned it a little bit. The rules have changed, and overtaking is now a very big part of F1. Overtaking before DRS was really just up to the situation of the race and the drivers and the driver's skill. Now, even if your car isn't as competitive as the car ahead of you, you get a little boost by opening that wing.
Right, and that can lead to having a faster lap when you shouldn't have a faster lap because maybe you come out of an exit wrong and the person in front has a better exit. He should essentially open that gap. But now here you come with DRS to close that gap. So like I said, the sport has changed drastically in different ways to that aspect.
Okay. I want to talk about Max Verstappen's current season. Then I want to look back at some seasons past. But first, I would like to quiz you, my friend.
Oh, joy.
Okay, there's a list out there that you can find easily of the top 100 percentages of wins by driver. Okay? So there's a list of 100 different drivers' names, although it's, a lot of the same drivers for which season they won the most races in. And I just want to see if you can guess maybe who has more than others, who has the most, so on and so forth. Who do you think has the most appearances on the top 100 list of most winning percentages per season?
Probably, I would assume Michael Schumacher.
Michael Schumacher. Do you know how many seasons he would appear in the top 100?
Let's go with 3. That might be a little much, but I'm gonna say 3.
8.
Whoa! Wait, hang on. He only has 7 titles, and yet he cleared the list 8 times.
Yep. Yeah, because there's multiples of the same season on here as well.
Oh.
You could have a season where you have two, like think of Nico and Lewis both winning 50-ish%. It's both going to be on the list. The list, I'll say, goes from Max's 77.78 down to drivers that have 12.5% wins. So it's a pretty big range. Who do you think's second on that list?
That one's probably got to be, I would say, Lewis.
With how many?
Michael Schumacher had how many? 8?
8.
Lewis and that Mercedes were pretty dominant.
Keep in mind, Lewis has more wins than Michael Schumacher does.
Yeah. Okay. Unless this is now a trick question because you added that bit, I'm going to say 10.
7.
It was a trick question. You didn't have to add that.
We're doing more races now than Michael Schumacher was doing. So while Lewis has more wins, he's also got more races.
The ratio is down. Okay. All right. That's fair.
Okay. From notable names, obviously there's people on here that are only listed once. But which 2 current drivers both have 3 appearances in the top 100?
Fernando Alonso. Current drivers. Max Verstappen.
That includes this season.
Okay.
Because, again, if this season was to end tomorrow for whatever reason, Max would be the number 1 winning percentage driver of all time. Now,
granted, that's only 9 races into the season of 22.
It still beats Alberto Ascari, who had 8 races.
I get it.
Okay, also on the list, you have Prost at 6, Juan Manuel Fangio at 6, Vettel and Senna at 4, and then we mentioned Verstappen and Alonso at 3. There's others on the list that you'll notice. Jack Brabham's on the list 3 times, Niki Lauda twice, Nelson Piquet makes his way on the list, Mika Hakkinen, Kimi Räikkönen, both on the list 2 times. So it's a pretty well-known list of who's who.
I mean, it makes sense.
In Formula One.
This stat kind of sounds like something that would be more prevalent in terms of kind of discussing who's a better driver in a sense, just because all of the names are people who I would consider top drivers in F1
Senna,
history.
Schumacher, Hamilton.
Right, exactly.
Okay, let's flip over the page to the constructors before we dive into Max Verstappen. Which constructor, I think you know the answer to this, has the most dominant season of all time? Percentage of wins in a season.
Ferrari.
No.
Oh, Mercedes.
No.
Is it Red Bull then?
No.
What? Oh, no. Oh, I'm so
The most
dumb.
dominant car.
Sorry. We had an entire episode on this talking about the McLaren MP4-4.
The best looking car of all time.
Oh, come on. I should have known that one. Dang it.
1988, McLaren goes 15 of 16 for a winning percentage of 93.8%.
It's my favorite stat because you look at the constructors nowadays, no team's doing that.
And it can really only be beat if you clean sweep a season and go 100%. Because 94%, you're going to have to add a lot of races to make that another race's worth of gap.
Well, I don't know. If there's 22 races nowadays and it's 19 at the time, if you were to lose one race now but win all the others, then technically wouldn't your percentage be higher?
Barely.
But you would get the crown.
Yeah, I guess so.
So the only way to actually, by merit, beat this record to where people wouldn't question it would be to win an entire season outright every single race.
If you get 100%, it could never be beat.
Which Red Bull's on pace to do.
Yes. So let's and you mentioned Ferrari. Ferrari's actually 3 and 4 on the list. 2002, they won 15 of 17. And in 1952, which is
Alberto Ascari.
Alberto Ascari, they won 7 out of 8.
Which,
so
fun little tidbit for you, is the last Italian to bring home the F1 Drivers' Championship.
Oh, 1952.
I don't know if it was that year, but Alberto Ascari is the last one to bring it home for Italy.
And we'll get into these seasons, but Mercedes makes the list 3 times, with 2016 winning 19 of 21, which is the closest, obviously. That's 90.5%.
Right.
And 2014 and 2015, they both won 16 out of 19.
Yeah, the only thing that's kind of crazy about that entire 2016 season is that, do you know who upset that season from being one of the greatest of all time? There was 2 drivers that took 2 wins off that plate.
Oh, the ones that weren't won by Hamilton and Rosberg.
Right.
Not Vettel.
No, Vettel wasn't on the team anymore. He had moved to Ferrari. Raikkonen, no, Ferrari. That would be a young Max Verstappen.
Max won in 2016.
And a young Daniel Ricciardo.
Wow.
So the 2 Red Bull drivers each snuck one away from the Mercedes drivers.
That was Max's first race, right?
I want to say it wasn't his first race, no. Because he had raced,
no, it was his first race at Red Bull.
I want to say his first race at Red Bull was 2015.
No, he ran Toro Rosso 2015. He ran 4 races of Toro Rosso in 2016.
And then immediately switched. So then, yes, that was his first ever win, 2016, to take it away from a Mercedes.
Jeez, what a man. Okay, so looking at Max's current season, the reason we want to talk about this, right now it is first week of July 2023, right? And we just finished the Austrian Grand Prix, one of Max's 3 home races, to where he won by about 5 seconds. He could have won by 25-ish seconds, give or take, but he decides to box with 2 laps left, get some soft tires, and also take the fastest lap point, which was genius. It doesn't often work for a lot of teams, but Max and Red Bull just make it work, no questions asked. Looking up to date, that was the 10th race of the year or the 9th race of the year? Ninth race of the year. He's won 7.
Yep.
And the only ones where he hasn't won were Saudi Arabia and Azerbaijan, where he got second, and his teammate Sergio Perez won.
Yep.
So not only is this a dominant year for Max Verstappen, where there is a chance he wins, 17, 18 races this season, there's a chance Red Bull goes 100% this year.
Yeah, I feel like the only thing that's going to get in the way is going to be Sergio Perez, because on that day, it's like our conversation with Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. On that day that Lewis can't get it done, Valtteri was there. Same as Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg, minus those 2 races by Max and Ricciardo. So the question is this going to be a Red Bull season like that 2016 Mercedes season where 2 people from whatever team, whether that's Ferrari, Aston Martin, or Mercedes, are going to steal a couple wins away? Or is this going to be a full-on Red Bull sweep through the entire season? And I think it mainly relies on Sergio Perez getting the win if Max has any kind of problems.
I agree. And we haven't really seen them compete yet. It's been either Max running away with it, or Sergio working his way up the field to second, or Sergio clearly running out ahead of it in the city circuit courses like Saudi Arabia and Azerbaijan.
Right. Where Max had to work up the field, and so by the time he got up to second, Sergio had built up a 16, 17-second lead, and that's just not going to be handled by Max.
And we've got a few more city circuits coming up, like Singapore.
Yes.
And that's a strong track for Sergio. Las Vegas is going to be on the schedule. That's going to be a city
circuit.
Las
Vegas is going to be an interesting one just because of how many straightaways the whole thing is. And Sergio, I feel like the thing that makes him the king of streets is that the turns are not what you would have on a perfect grid, on a perfect track that's actually built for racing. You would see more like awkward turns and like random 90-degree angles, and that's stuff that, Sergio, I guess, is going to excel in a little bit more.
Yeah, he's more of a finesse kind of guy, a Lewis Hamilton, if you will. Kind of. Not quite on the same level.
Hear you.
So as we approach this next race, which is the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, this is a track where both Red Bull drivers have not had a great history at. And I say not great. Like, they've had a lot of top 10 finishes. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
They don't have a lot of wins.
No.
I don't think they have any wins at the British Grand Prix. And I will delete that from the podcast if I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure they don't. And so if there's going to be a week for it to happen, I think it's going to be this week. If an Alonso's going to win, a Hamilton, a Russell, a Carlos Sainz, this is going to be the week where it turns around. But
Or a Fernando Alonso.
I said Alonso first.
Oh, dang it.
If things hold like they have this season and the winning percentage stays the same for Max at 77.78, he is on track to win either 17 or 18 races.
Jeez.
So he wins 15 in 2022.
Yep.
This season, that would be 17 or 18, which would blow that record out of the water, which already beat Schumacher's record.
And that's assuming that Sergio steals a couple more wins away.
Right.
Or
this
anybody.
This is running at the same pace we're running at today. He's on track to win 17 or 18 races. It's like 17.8. So if you want to round up, it's 18. You want to round down at 17. And that means Sergio wins 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that range.
Which means Max loses 4 races, which puts him nowhere near the most dominant season by a driver.
No. If Max wins at his rate of 77%, he is still the number 1 overall driver of all time. Now, if he wins 17, that might change it. He might have to win 18 to hold on to that.
Because what about Michael Schumacher's season?
Okay, if he wins 17 races, he will be second all time. If he wins 18, he will be first all time. Man, there's a lot on the line, Max. You
Can't lose any more races for the rest of the season.
No, he can win. He can win 18, so he can lose
3, 4.
He can lose 4. Yeah, so he's got to win the rest of them except for 2.
Jeez.
Okay, so that's Max Verstappen season. And then looking at the Red Bull picture overall, we've mentioned 1,000 times already, Sergio Perez has 2 wins. He's got a lot of second place finishes. He's currently second in the driver standings. It's up in the air on if he holds that, I think, still. There's some competition behind him. He can certainly still hold on to it. But just as a season from the Red Bull perspective, right now they would not – well, right now they'd be at 100%.
Yep.
Which would put them top all time ahead of McLaren's 93.8%.
Isn't that insane?
That's a lot of wins.
Red Bull has a chance to win every single race in this entire season.
And it's not even like it's not because other teams have had reliability issues that have taken them out of races or they've had strategical things that have taken. No, Red Bull's just running away with every single race. It's not even close. Like the closest it was going to be was Charles, or I guess in Canada when Alonso and Hamilton were like 12 seconds back.
Yeah, and Alonso had that problem with his tires where he had to lift and coast.
I will say, if this is something that you're interested in learning more about, we tried to go and source out articles and papers or whatever you want to call them on the largest margins of victory by time. And you can't find anything. Like, you can find single races, obviously, like the race results.
Right.
But I want to know an entire season, what is every driver's combined times averaged out and who has the lowest? Because that really shows you in a season who was, like the most dominant. You can say, okay, Schumacher has 7 of the top 100 seasons. Hamilton has 6. Verstappen has 3. But if Verstappen is winning by an average of 40 seconds and Hamilton was winning by an average of 2 seconds,
that's dominance.
What are we talking about?
But see, that's a combination, right? Because that's not just Max Verstappen and his A-list driving. That's also going to be Red Bull and more specifically Adrian Newey putting together one of the greatest machines that's ever been on track. I mean, in my personal opinion, we're talking about a guy who has had the best car on track multiple times over in his entire F1 career as an engineer. And so now with the number 1 engineer in the game designing the best car to ever take the field with the most aggressive, fastest driver on the track, yeah, it's not going to be close. I mean, didn't we see a stat the other day that was like, forget about time on the track to take 1 lap. Max Verstappen takes the least amount of distance to go 1 lap around a track. That means that on a track where everybody makes the exact same turns, goes down the exact same straights, he's somehow going around it, and it's a shorter track for him because he stays inside or whatever move that he takes. But that stat alone I found insane. Because think about that. 1 lap, 2 drivers side by side. They do the exact same lap. Max's lap was shorter. How does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know. It's almost like that. It's almost like the conversation around Le Mans, where like you have one driver that starts 20 meters ahead of another driver, and so when they cross the finish line, if they do it at the same time, the driver that started 20 meters behind actually wins.
Yeah. I mean, it's some stats like that.
Yeah.
But we have that with the number one driver or with the number one car on the grid.
Okay, looking back at previous seasons, I'm going to go chronologically backwards here, at least as much as I can. 2022, Max Verstappen wins 15 out of 22 races, 68%. You're going to hear a lot of Red Bull and Mercedes in this list, and we'll get to Ferrari with Michael Schumacher. But the past 3 seasons, starting in 2021 with Max Verstappen taking the championship, yes, there's the whole thing with Lewis. It was still a really good season for Max Verstappen, taking the last race out. So even if you don't agree with the championship decision, it was an all-time great season. Red Bull's been on a run here. And again, it goes back to that team approach. You just mentioned him, Adrian Newey designing the cars, Christian Horner running the team. That's what all of these drivers on this list have pieced together. Yes, they were great, and their seasons show that. But oftentimes they're great with one team, right? When they change teams, what happens?
Things typically will fall apart.
It changes.
Right.
We see that with Sebastian Vettel. Goes on a run with Red Bull, then gets the nice red phone call from Ferrari, the iconic team in Formula One, and says, I've got to go. It's Ferrari.
Now, granted, he got 2 second-place years where he finished second in the drivers, but he's not winning anymore.
But had he stayed at Red Bull, he's probably got a few more.
That's close. That's a close call.
You look at Hamilton. Obviously, he wins 1 at McLaren, but then he wins 7 at Mercedes. And then Michael Schumacher, obviously, all at Ferrari, essentially. So Max Verstappen has a great season in 23, a great season in 22. We mentioned 2021. Let's flip over to Mr. Sir Lewis Hamilton. 2020, Lewis goes 11 for 17 with a 64% winning percentage. And this was the COVID year, a year with a lot of weird stuff, and honestly, that should be more respectable than it is on that list with how weird that season was.
So looking at that, you said 2020, correct?
2020.
Looking at that year, Lewis is kind of actually doing some kind of things that are very, very similar to what Red Bull's doing this season. So in Turkey, he put a 31-second gap between him and the guy in second. In Portugal, he put up a 25-second gap. In Spain, he put up 24-second gap. So then we have 13 seconds, 16 seconds. Like, he had a big gap, just like these Red Bull cars. The only thing that I'm kind of curious on is that while Max is having 20 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds on a regular basis, if you're looking at these numbers, I'm only listing the highlighted ones that are the biggest, that stand out the most in the Mercedes year for 2020 for Lewis Hamilton. The rest of them are like 8 seconds, 5 seconds, 8 seconds, 4, 5. That sounds more realistic. But Red Bull's not doing that. They're not losing. The only one that came close was this past one where Charles was right on his butt, but that's because he pit for softs. Yeah. Otherwise, he would have had a 25-second gap. So I don't know, man. It doesn't really add up. It doesn't compare to what they're doing this year.
This is why I was looking at kind of those, is there an article out there where someone's done the research on all the times? Because maybe that's a modern F1 thing. The cars, whenever you go into a new era, right, the turbo hybrid era, or the regulations that we're in now that were released last year with the single wing design, right, the one-piece wing, maybe the cars now, you can just design them. You have more flexibility or freedom to design a more powerful car than in years past, and therefore you can run 40 seconds on somebody if you design things right, whereas in years past, maybe the cars were more... And I don't even know if that's true, because I think back at the origins of F1, the cars were drastically different.
I was going to say, I believe that from like 2000 and on.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about cars from back in the day, you had some cars with wings that were way over the top. You had one car with 6 tires. Yeah.
They rolled out a
they
UTV.
Were dramatically different.
Yeah, so I don't even know if that point stands. I guess it's maybe just teams now, the technology advances that they have, they're able to do. There's got to be some reasoning for, in recent years, drivers being able to pull away more than years past, but
I think Red Bull just hit the mark.
They just nailed it.
I think they did because, okay, so if you're looking at the time differences from back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the time distances are dramatic.
Yeah.
They're very dramatic. Cars were finishing on a completely different time schedule, like a time zone completely. I mean, like I said, the record's 5 minutes basically?
4 minutes, 54 seconds.
Right, exactly. But nowadays, you're getting 20 seconds, 15 seconds. And if you look, I guess I'm going to call it more like the F1 modern era. If you look at kind of like 2000 and on, then maybe it'll back up a little bit more than that. But really, where we start to see aerodynamics take over the F1 game. And now they've got like anytime that you see wherever the regulations change and you see everything have a big mix up, one team dominates. Mercedes dominated, and they had those gaps. We're looking at the times right now where he had those 25-second gaps. Now it's Red Bull's turn, but it seems like Red Bull just hit the mark better. And it's, in my opinion, 2023 brought such a giant regulation change, or not even 2023, but whenever they started allowing under the car, all of those specs, that's what really changed the game.
You know what's scary, though? We talked about this a lot watching last season live whenever they rolled out the new regulations, right? And Red Bull was dominant in 2022. We talked about this then. And we said, oh, you know what? In a couple of years, the teams will catch up. Much like when Mercedes rolled out in 2014, 2015 under the new regulations, Mercedes was dominant. And over time, Red Bull caught up.
Right.
We're seeing Red Bull only pull away.
Yeah, that's so this year they're seeing them pull away way more than last year. But if you think about it, they had this drastic gap. The only car that was able to touch them last season was Ferrari, and their engine blew up like every other race.
And
so they had to, halfway through the season, they had to turn their engine power down. So now Ferrari's going into this season with an engine that could potentially put more power out than Red Bull, but they can't because of durability. So they have to figure out how to get those tenths of seconds from other directions.
Well, the car either blew up or they put them on tires that worked like ice skates and send their drivers into the wall.
The engine was just too powerful for the car.
It was last year's Ferrari car, the 2024, is widely considered one of the best F1 cars, if not the best F1 car of all time. It just, like you said, it just blew up. So I don't. Is it the best? Probably not.
Yeah, I'm just having images of Carlos Sainz rolling backwards back onto the track
fire
as he's trying to get out of the car.
Oh man, yeah. So I mean, Mercedes obviously went on a run, and we have seen Mercedes roll out an upgrade package in 2023 where they get side pods back, which they haven't had in 2 seasons. And that didn't make their car really competitive with the Red Bull. It just made it more competitive with the top of the rest of the top of the field.
Catching up to the Aston Martin.
And so I guess if we go back to the previous explanation I had given of teams can catch Red Bull over the next couple of years, I guess they still can, but they're still trying to just get on the same level of everybody else, which just means Red Bull is 10 steps ahead.
So while Red Bull is just basically not even focused on this year's car whatsoever, and I could be wrong on that, they could still be bringing upgrade packages for this year. But in my biggest opinion, I'm going to assume they've already started working on the 2024 car.
We haven't heard this yet, but you know we're going to go into a race weekend where the articles all leak and come out and say, Red Bull's rolling out an upgrade package. Everybody's going to be like, upgrade?
Why?
Upgrading what? How? What are you gonna upgrade?
They're getting an extra tenth.
I mean, see, like any upgrade is just sprinkles. I don't know, just icing on the cake.
But could you imagine if they could make it faster?
They can. I'm sure they can.
That's what they're working on.
This was their first iteration of the car.
Was it?
I mean, they haven't really rolled out a significant upgrade package in 2023, so I'm saying like whatever, like they're running what they started the season on. So this is
that's
first
kind of what
one.
I'm getting from it as well. Obviously, minus the tweaks that they do from track to track.
Sure, the changing the camber,
the
and the suspension, the package, but they haven't changed the whole wing design. They haven't changed the side pod design. McLaren and Mercedes both rolled out new side pods. Ferrari and McLaren rolled out entirely new floor designs
and front wings.
Which, if you're on Reddit and you're telling me that they didn't copy the RB19 floor design, I will correct you that there are many journalists in the paddock that claim that they copied the RB19 floor design.
I actually saw this post and I wanted to comment on this because you did have some interesting points, but kind of the rebuttal was everybody was saying that wasn't going to be possible for somebody to roll out a floor plan based on what they saw in Monaco that soon. But your point to that was that they already were working on an underbelly area for the car.
Sure.
And once they saw the Red Bull, they just made minor tweaks to the final product. That makes sense because they already have the finished product in the base of what they're going to roll out. So the meat of it's already done. They're just making the final tweaks to try and get some last minute performance.
And if you don't think they can roll out upgrade packages quickly, which, yes, I know there's a podcast with F1 engineers that say it takes months of planning and design. Yes, but how do you think upgrade packages happen in a season? they start the season, they get data, and then they upgrade the car.
Right.
It doesn't take a year to roll out an upgrade package because then you're just talking about next year's car.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm just going to leave that aside. That's my little venting on that. Let's go back to a specific season that we've referenced before.
Okay.
What was Nico's championship year?
2016.
2016. And how many races did he win in 2016?
9.
And he won as the champion, right?
Yep.
How many races did Lewis Hamilton win that year?
And that's where it gets interesting. As Lewis Hamilton comes home to win 10 Grand Prix races that season, but finishes 5 points behind Nico Rosberg.
So when you're talking about dominant seasons, one, clearly a dominant season for Mercedes. You're talking about 19 some odd victories. But let's take this a little bit further in depth. If Lewis wasn't a driver, or if Nico wasn't a driver, or they were on a different team, what are the chances the other driver won 90-something% of the races? Probably pretty high.
Especially if you were partnered with somebody that wouldn't necessarily meet your standards. Like in this case we have now with Max Verstappen and Checo Perez.
Yep.
No diss to Checo, but Max is a once-in-a-lifetime talent. He's one of the ones that come through once every decade. I'm a Fernando Alonso type, a Lewis Hamilton type, a Sebastian Vettel type. But even more so than Sebastian Vettel, as he's starting to creep up on how many titles Sebastian had. He's chasing number 3 now. Sebastian had 4.
So when you look at that season, Nico obviously had his 9 victories, but he finished in second 5 times.
Right.
All to Lewis.
That's the kicker.
Lewis had his 10 victories, but finished in second 3 times, all to Nico. So they're interchangeable almost like we're looking at Max and Sergio. Now Sergio has 2 wins in 2023. Max finished second in both of those races, but I think they were pretty comfortable victories for Sergio. I don't think we could say the same about Sergio, right? If Max were to not be involved, Sergio wouldn't be winning every single race.
But if Max wasn't involved, Sergio would definitely be winning more. I'm not going to say that he has every single win of this season so far, but I'm going to say he brings home 4 out of he has 2 right now. I'm saying he adds 2 more to that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right because he has 2 victories and he's finished in second twice.
Oh, well then right on the money.
so he would have 4. But it's not the same as the Lewis and Nico 2016 decision where they could, go from 10 wins to 15, 16 wins or 9 wins to 15, 16 wins just by having their own teammate take victories away from them.
That's got to be rough, right? You're in the cool down. I mean, you have to understand that every single time that those 2 entered the cool down room for that entire season, it was just rage from whoever finished behind the other.
And Lewis has had this who was Lewis's teammate in 08?
In 08?
Yeah, it wasn't Alonso anymore.
It wasn't Alonso at the time.
I want to say
it was in 2008. No, I want to say it was Button.
So Lewis has had this a lot where he goes from Nico, who was and again, this is a Mercedes thing and a top team thing, but he competes at Mercedes with Nico constantly. Then Valtteri comes in, and while he didn't necessarily compete with Valtteri got a lot of wins.
He did.
And when Lewis wasn't winning, Valtteri was winning, much like it was with Nico. And then now he's got George Russell. George Russell's only got 1 win, but I think in a season or 2, George Russell's going to be on that level.
By the way, the second driver you were looking for was Kovalainen.
Oh, okay. Well, he's not.
Right. Good driver. No disrespect. You have to be a stud to even make it into F1.
Yeah.
But you're not on Lewis Hamilton's level.
We were talking about before we started recording the podcast of like Tom Cruise driving a Red Bull car, and he was saying that he was 4 miles per hour off of David Coulthard in the same 2011 Red Bull car. And Jeremiah was like, how long would it take Tom Cruise to get up to like a Nicholas Latifi type level? And like, you can't. Like, even though there's guys on the F1 grid that are bad, right? Like, we look at Nikita Mazepin, Latifi, Stroll back in the day. They're still top 20, top 30 drivers in the world.
Right, and these are guys that are finishing like 10, 15 seconds behind the guy in front of them.
Yeah, and in ultra-competitive seasons, not like the one that we're in now, you can have a race where every driver is within qualifying, at least every driver's within 1 second of each other in a qualifying pace. Yeah, there's no way me or you could spend 10 years and ever get that.
I could give it my best shot.
We could devote every day of our life for 10 years and we wouldn't come within 10 seconds of them.
I wonder at what point would we go from, wow, he's making great progress to, oh, he just picked up another 100th.
Another 100th? And how many cars would we wreck in the process?
Oh, no. Hey, Tom Cruise spun that car. Let us not forget.
So last driver that I really want to talk about is Michael Schumacher. He's on this list, like I said, the most times at 8.
What season do you want to bring up in specific?
So I think we got to talk 02 and 04.
Okay.
So 2002, he goes 11 of 17. 2004, he goes 13 for 18.
So to talk about that 2002 season a little bit, some of the time differences between him and the people finishing right behind him, the gaps that he had in the very first race in Australia, he put up an 18-second gap. Now, granted, the next one was a lot closer, but after that, 17 seconds, 35 seconds, 14 seconds, 10 seconds. After that, it's pretty much close. But for those 4 or 5 races that I just listed, he had over 10 seconds of a gap.
It's pretty impressive.
It's impressive.
And it goes to that there might not be a pattern in determining what era or if there's any type of reasoning behind winning. I think it's just how good of a driver are you?
I think it's track specific. Yeah. I really do. I think on some tracks people can follow a little bit closer behind throughout the entirety of a race versus tracks that might be a little bit bigger. Like, for example, to look at the 2004 season, he did put up some of those times still. In Australia, he again put up a 13-second gap. So that tells me that a track like Albert Park is going to be a little bit easier for him to break away and get that gap. But then 5 seconds in Malaysia, so it gets back down to the low. But then it jumps back up and he gets 13, 17. I mean,
if you've got a straight line speed car on a straight line track,
right, like something like Monza,
right, or Azerbaijan, you're going to gain more time than you would in a high turn track.
Or if you're on a track with a lot of turns and you just float through turns like nothing, versus another car that might be a lot of top speed, like a Williams, where on straightaways they're really powerful.
I think looking back at his career, he has so many seasons. It's essentially the entire 2000s. I mean, it's 2000 to 2006, and then it's 94 and 95. He was just the dominant driver of the era. And so when we look at, again, the main conversation is how dominant is Max Verstappen's 2023 season compared to everybody else. I think the answer is just yes. How dominant is it? Yeah, it's up there, but we won't know until the entire season plays out. And even then, even if he wins 70, 80 something % of the seasons, it's always going to be this classic debate of Schumacher, Hamilton, Verstappen, Senna. Senna could have been 12-time world champion. Who knows? It's the thing they talk about all the time with basketball, Jordan or LeBron.
But see, that's it, right? It's not a matter of whenever you're crowned the GOAT. It's a matter of whenever you enter the conversation.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the winning piece, the piece de resistance. So once you get into that conversation, you have officially goated yourself to a sense.
And the weird thing for Max, this would be his third title if he wins this year.
Yep. 21-22.
He's essentially got to do his entire career over again to get up to the level of Hamilton and Schumacher.
So you can almost kind of say that 23 is already locked in the bag. In fact, I've seen some funny memes out there of like a guy that does the really good impersonations of all the different drivers. I've seen, and this is a shout out to you. I wish I knew your name. We can tag you down below. But he has this one great bit where he did today where he was like, Max, what are your thoughts on the championship this season? And he's like, oh, come on, guys. This isn't the right time to be talking about that. We finished that 2 months ago. We started celebrating with champagne 2 months ago. This is like, I mean, honestly, though.
I mean, we're going to get a point in the next 5 or 6 races where it's locked in.
Right.
And there's going to be 5 or 6 races left.
That's ridiculous.
That he doesn't even have to enter.
If he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And you know what? If I were him, I wouldn't.
Yeah, just in case. You never know what's going to happen out there.
So we look back at this, and this season will go down as one of the best of all time if things play out like we think they will. And the Red Bull, again, the Red Bull's so far ahead of every car that even if they lose a race or two, it's still going to be awesome however many races they win. Does he go down as the number one driver? We brought this up at least 2 times on the podcast before. What are your odds or predictions on if Red Bull gets a sweep here all 100% of the 23 races available.
The problem with this is that every logical part of my brain says that that's not statistically possible for them to sweep the rest of the season. But then you look at a Ferrari season, or you look at, Lewis Hamilton seasons in the past, and it's like, they could. They could. And then you look at the gaps, and he's finishing with 20 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds. It's kind of unreal. I don't see anybody catching him. But, like I said, the logical side of me says it's just not possible.
The 1988 McLaren season, where they lost one race.
Right.
They lost one to Gerhard Berger.
Oh, right.
Which is another name up there with some of the best in Formula One. I'm just trying to think of, they had a season where they had 17 races and they could win 16. That might be the best that you're able to do.
What do you mean?
In terms of percentages, if we're running 6 more races,
yeah,
and I've got to win 7 more races than they did,
clean sweep.
Because again, there's going to be a race where they've got to take a new engine, they've got to take a new suspension package, they have to start from the pit lane, right?
Sure.
They get disqualified from qualifying, or they crash out in qualifying. There's going to be some race where that happens to both Max and Sergio. And we've seen Max work his way up from 20th, from 18th, from 15th, and win the race. But the odds are so much against them.
That brings up a good point, though, because to talk about that 1988 Formula One season, McLaren won every single race except for one for that entire season. In that race, they had one retirement from Alain Prost, and then Ayrton Senna finished in 10th still. And the points, what would be considered points today, I don't think it was points back in that time. But my point is, Red Bull already they've won every single race. I was going to say they already have a race where somebody has won. The problem is, like you said, there's about 5 more extra races, and they got to go the entire rest of the distance. But they can lose one race, and their stats will still be higher, just because there's more races.
Looking at this season, though, I actually feel more comfortable with the 1988 season because Senna won a ton of races and Prost won a ton of races, but Prost got second in almost every single race he didn't win, with the exception of 2 retirements. You don't have that with Red Bull right now. Sergio's great. He's got his 2 wins, but he's not getting second every single time Max takes first.
Right, but you got to remember Prost won that year. Ayrton Senna came in second, and if you look at Ayrton Senna, where he placed when Prost won, and he did get second 3 times, but what about the rest of the times that Prost won? He got disqualification, retirement, 10th place, 6th place, 4th place. So that's kind of what Sergio's doing. Now, granted, Sergio's not winning half of the races.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. If there's a race where Max is off, Sergio's only got a 20% chance of winning, right? So it has to line up where Max is off and it's a track that Sergio can win at.
Right. They can't get into one of those scenarios where he's stuck behind the Ferraris and can't find a way around or something like that.
This next, we talked about it at the start of the show. Great Britain's coming up. Silverstone. Neither of them have a great history.
No, I was trying to see if
both of them struggle.
Yeah, exactly. I was trying to see if Max Verstappen had a win in Silverstone, just to make sure that we weren't wrong in this sense. I didn't see anything.
You know what's going to stink is we get all the way to Abu Dhabi and they've won everything and then they lose the last one.
Come on, man. Hey, but that would mean that they have a more higher winning percentage than any other.
They would, but it would be a perfect game blown in the ninth. And Las Vegas is a wild card. I think Las Vegas could be won by literally anybody that's in the top 6 of the Drivers' Championship right now.
Yeah, because we don't know what to expect. Plus, Williams has a lot of speed on those straightaways, and Vegas is literally just 4 giant straightaways with some chicanes here and there.
And even, we're not saying that Williams is going to win the Las Vegas Grand Prix, but it throws a wrench having a team that you're not used to up in the top competing for the top. Because if you have Alex Albon running third, he's going to be doing a lot more crazy stuff than Fernando Alonso or Lewis Hamilton does in third place.
Oh, yeah, he's going to be full sending it, trying to make sure that he stays up there.
Running some kind of sketchy strategy. And because at that point, it doesn't matter. You either get a top 3 finish or you don't finish the race. It's one or the other.
So just for you stat fans out there, Checo Perez has came in second before in the Great Britain Grand Prix. Yep. Never won it. Max Verstappen has also come in second. Never won it. So to your point, they've got to break the curse.
They've got to beat those Brits of Hamilton,
Lando, Russell.
It could happen. I mean, this is going to be the Red Bull car that can do it. That's the other side of this. Is we're
That's
talking
true.
about the driver struggles there, but they've never had a car like this
Right.
in that track. Okay, hope you liked our bit of a dive into most dominant seasons. If you have an example that we did not cover, if you really think Prost had the most dominant run, or Senna, or if you know anything about those times that we were asking about, if you know of an article out there that shows me every season, or if I have to write it, I will write it myself and publish it. Someone's got to do that information and that research.
Guys, we have our websites that we like to go to find different stats on different past seasons and different races more specifically. But if you have some ideas on where we can go to find more information or more suitable information that we can share that maybe people aren't really looking at, not the norm, something that we can really dive into and kind of pull more out of it to give y'all a better experience watching our show, let us know down below. Like, I want to know what these websites are. I will do the research.
What are the underground F1 pages? I don't want the Formula One Reddit page. I want the underground.
Yeah, I want the side of the iceberg that's all the way down there. None of that surface level stuff.
All right, guys, we thank you for watching. Leave us a comment, and if you like this content, let us know about it.
Bye, guys.